Morning, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls Tara Roberts.
All right. Let's see if we can get her.
All right, everybody.
Nice. Ms. Roberts, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ms. Roberts? Ms. Roberts? I can see you. Excuse me? Yeah, you can bring them in. See if she's on mute or not. She's right there. Can you hear me, Ms. Roberts?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Can you raise your right hand for me?
Or OAB can change your
Do you
world.
swear or affirm to tell the
by going
truth under
hiking.
penalty of law?
Just stop.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
By going hiking. Just stop. By going hiking. Just stop.
We can't see her on the big screen. Just do a split screen so we can start this. All right. Go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead. It's the best we're going to do right now.
Okay. Good morning. Would you please state your name for the record?
Tarly Roberts.
Ms. Roberts, how do you know Johnny Depp?
I manage his island in the Exuma Keys in the Bahamas for the past 15
No
years.
people leaving.
Ms. Roberts, where do you live?
I live on the island, and I have a home in Nassau and in Long Island, Bahamas, which I try to get to as frequently as possible.
Can you please describe Mr. Depp's private island generally?
My duties on the private island would be to maintain the island, the buildings, the houses, logistics, not included or limited to provisioning fuel, gas, groceries, just day-to-day operations, staff, and kind of like an estate just in the middle of nowhere.
Okay. Your Honor, I would like to pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 49, which has previously been submitted into evidence.
Okay.
And Mr. Gibson, if you could play this, and Your Honor, if you could publish this to the jury. Thank you. We can take that down. Ms. Roberts, do you recognize what is shown in that video?
Yes, that's Johnny
Ms. Roberts,
Depp
do you recognize what is shown in that video?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that's Ms. Roberts, do you
Can you
recognize?
please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 348? And this hasn't been submitted into evidence yet, so let's first just play that for Ms. Roberts. Ms. Roberts, do you recognize what is shown in that video?
That's his house and closet area.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to, plaintiff moves to admit this into evidence.
All right, 348 in evidence. You wish to have it published?
Yes, can we please publish
Okay.
that to the jury? And Mr. Gibson, once it's published, we can do that again. And Ms. Roberts, what is that doorway with the beads that was just shown in that video?
That's the entrance to the closet
Thank you. Put that down.
in his house.
Ms. Roberts, I believe you mentioned that you manage staff on the island. How many people work with you on the island?
Myself and three others is Jason Major, goes by CJ, Stephen Farrow, and Rico Major.
Is this, I believe the witness is not being shown to the jury right now on their screens. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Ms. Roberts, how are you compensated for your work on the island?
I receive a monthly salary.
Other than this monthly salary, what other sources of income do you have?
I get dividends and rental from family properties and businesses that we have.
Since you've been working for Mr. Depp, how often have you seen him?
On average, 2-3 times a year. Sometimes it was longer, more visits. Sometimes I didn't see him for a period of time, depending on what his schedule was or what was happening on the island.
And how would you describe your interactions with Mr. Depp?
The island was a very family atmosphere, dinners together. He was very social, funny, humorous, very kind with all of us, and very outgoing. Enjoyed working with him and for him.
When you first started working on Mr. Depp's island, who would come down to the island?
At the beginning, it was Vanessa and the children.
Objection.
When he started
Relevance.
dating
All
Amber.
right, hold on a minute, ma'am. Objection.
Relevance.
It goes to just Ms. Roberts' knowledge of who came down to the island.
We
with
can
Mr.
move
Depp.
forward. Next question.
Okay. Ms. Roberts, Ms. Roberts, are you aware if Mr. Depp brought, or how often did Mr. Depp bring guests with him to the island?
He had guests. He would bring Amber and Amber with her friends, and also I had on one of the occasions I had Paul Bettany and his wife and his children here on one of the trips.
And when did the Bettneys come down to the island?
Sometime in the summer of July 2013.
What happened when the Bettneys came down?
It was a normal trip. We had an incident where I was asked to have Amber leave the island. I scheduled a flight for her to leave to go to Florida that morning, and then that afternoon I was told to bring her back, and I arranged for a flight for her to come back that afternoon to the island.
When did you first meet Ms. Heard?
I believe it was shortly after they started dating.
What was your impression of Ms. Heard when you first met her?
Objection.
Oh, they were very much in love.
Relevance.
Okay, go ahead. Next question.
I think Ms. Bredhoff withdrew her objection.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so Ms. Roberts, you can answer. What was your impression of Ms. Heard when you first met her?
Oh, they were very nice, a couple in love. She cooked for him, cleaned up. They took care of each other. They were a very happy couple.
When, if at all, did that change?
With each visit, it changed. More of it was more not like an island life anymore. It was more of wines and more requests, just simple things, toiletries, to have things here in place before they came or she came as well. So it, luggage changed. We got more and more luggage. Just things evolved and kind of mushroomed a bit.
How often would you see Ms. Heard on the island when she was in a relationship with Mr. Depp?
I would, on average, every day, taking meals, cleaning houses, sometimes more.
And how often would Ms. Heard come down to the island?
At the beginning, probably the same 2 or 3 times a year, sometimes 3 times with her friends and family and Johnny.
During your interactions with Ms. Heard, what, if any, changes did you observe of Ms. Heard?
The taking care of the cooking the meals, we then had a chef come to cook. It was more of a formal island with chefs and housekeepers and things like that. Changed yeah, pretty much that.
Ms. Roberts, were you on the island in August 2014 for Mr. Depp's detox?
Yes, I was.
Who else was on the island?
I flew to Nassau and met Johnny, Amber, and Deb. I flew them back to the island, and then a couple of...
Ms. Roberts, I believe you froze there for a second. I heard you say Johnny, Amber, and Deb, and then you were cut off for a second.
A couple of days later, Dr. Kipper arrived.
What do you recall about that time that Mr. Depp came down to the island in August 2014?
That he was going to be here. They were going to be here for an extended period of time, at least a month or longer. And so we provisioned for a month for the trip. And after about a week or 2, they left.
Where was Mr. Depp staying for the detox?
In his house.
Is that the same house that was just shown in those videos earlier?
Yes, it was.
How often would you see Mr. Depp when he was on the island for the detox?
I was every day, but not face to face. Just from delivering, replenishing the house, delivering supplies, waters, and things like that, linens, and changing things out. So glimpsing him, not a conversation as it used to be.
How was Mr. Depp when you saw him?
He was always asleep on the couch.
While Ms. Heard was on the island for the detox, what, if any, injuries did you observe on Ms. Heard?
I didn't see anything.
After Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard left the island, what happened next?
We would go into the house and break it down, empty out the refrigerators, change the linens, collect the laundry, straighten the house back up again.
After they left, what, if any, property damage did you observe?
There wasn't any.
Ms. Roberts, to what extent were you involved in Mr. Depp and Mrs. Heard's wedding in February 2015 on the island?
Pretty much all aspects of it, logistics, work permits, getting things set up onto the island, to the island, staff, provisions, building of the tents and organizing transportation of guests to and from the island.
When did you first hear that Mr. Depp and Miss Heard were getting married on the island?
Objection calls for hearsay and relevance.
What's the relevance of when she heard?
I can move on.
Okay, next question.
What communications, if any, did you have with Miss Heard about the wedding?
We were given information on a schedule to better help me schedule and the provisioning of what would be on the island, beverages and food and things like that. We were given a schedule for daily things were going to happen each day, what time foods were, when people were coming in, how many people would be at meals, just so I had a better idea of planning of what was happening. It was detailed. It was what was happening each day and then it was the rehearsal night, and there would be, we had scheduled, it would be dinner, dancing, drugs, music, and then the wedding. We were very conscious about doing the wedding. The next day we were doing the wedding, the ceremony, and we were specific on time. Privacy was very important. We were very careful of people taking pictures. I think everybody was given disposable cameras and asked not to take pictures. I was concerned about that also, but we were doing the ceremony at sunset, so there really wouldn't be issue with paparazzi people and things like that. And shortly when the ceremony was about to happen, it actually happened earlier than it was scheduled. The bridal party and Amber showed up early, and we were still scrambling for flowers and setting up and getting beverages and snacks down there. And there was a plane circling overhead, and it would just kept on circling and circling and taking pictures, and the ceremony proceeded earlier than was scheduled.
Did you observe Mr. Depp drinking alcohol at the wedding?
Objection leading.
All right, I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. Ms. Roberts, as part of the provisioning for the wedding, did you order alcohol for the wedding?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Okay. Ms. Roberts, what did you order for the wedding in February 2015?
I was given a list of food. I was given a list of beverages for wines, champagnes. I was asked to have Dr. Pepper and sugar-free Red Bull here, because at that time that was what Mr. Depp or Johnny was drinking, was Dr. Pepper and sugar-free Red Bull.
Okay. Did you observe Ms. Heard drinking alcohol at the wedding?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Who did you observe drinking alcohol at the wedding?
Pretty much everybody was drinking and doing shots and celebrating. It was a party.
Ms. Roberts, I'd like to discuss with you when Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard were on the island in December 2015. Who came down to the island with them?
I flew to Nassau to meet them, which is what I normally do. I meet himself, Johnny, and whoever comes to the island. I fly to Nassau to meet them, just to make sure that the transition is smooth with customs and immigration. So I flew to Nassau, and I met Johnny, Amber, his children, and a friend of the children, and load the luggage onto the caravan plane, and we boarded the plane and came to the island. And a couple days into the trip, Alice and Greg and Alice's 3 children and a nanny came to the island as well.
Who are Alice and Greg?
Alice is a clothes designer, and Greg was her partner, and I believe he's a photographer.
When did you first interact with Ms. Heard when she came to the island in December 2015?
At the airport when I flew to Nassau to meet everybody. Usually when they come down off the plane, you know, there's hugs and kisses and chatting for a couple minutes while the luggage is transferred.
How close were you to Ms. Heard?
Close, hug, kiss, you know, how are you, talk, same with everybody. So face to face, cheek to cheek.
What, if any, makeup did you observe Ms. Heard wearing when you first interacted with her?
I don't recall if she was or was not wearing makeup. If she wore makeup, it was very natural. I don't think often she wore makeup on the island. I don't recall her wearing makeup.
What, if any, injuries did you notice on Ms. Heard?
I didn't notice any.
Ms. Roberts, you mentioned that Gregory, a photographer, came to the island during that time. How often did you observe Gregory on the island?
I interacted every day because meals went down and changing the sheets and cleaning the room. So I see everybody every day there.
And when you saw him, what was he doing? They were doing. There was a photo shoot on the island. Amber was wearing Alice's clothes, and they were doing a photo shoot on the beach. And Greg was taking the pictures. What, if anything, do you remember about that particular time that Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard came down to the island?
There was a incident between Johnny and Amber here during that trip.
Okay, can you please describe that incident?
On the evening, we kind of called it a night. Dinner was finished. We wrapped everything up down here at the staff area in the kitchen. Myself and CJ came to the office later on that evening, and Johnny was in the office up here, and he was agitated, kind of walking back and forth. I'd asked him if he needed anything because I wasn't sure if he was up here to get something or was looking for something, which wouldn't be unusual for people to come up here. So he was here, talked for a couple minutes, the three of us, and a couple minutes later, Amber came into the office and the three of us were in the office, and Amber came in, and she was asking him to tell him to come back to the house. Please come back. I'm sorry, come back. And he stood here, reluctant to go, didn't want to go, and a little exchange back and forth. He left the office and got into his vehicle and started it up, and Amber went outside and stood in front of the vehicle so that didn't drive away. Amber was standing in front of it, and again, she was asking him to don't leave. I'm sorry. Come back to the house. After a couple minutes, she got in the vehicle and they left to go back to their house.
What happened after they went back up to the house?
CJ and I were still in the office and weren't really sure. Decided that maybe it would be best if we just drove up there just to make sure that everything was okay. And so we got in the golf cart and we drove up to their house, got into the parking lot, and his vehicle was in the parking lot, and you could hear them. You can hear them inside the. You could hear inside the house yelling, Amber yelling, and Johnny answering back, but you could really hear what was being said. We stood there for a couple minutes, CJ and myself, and then you started to hear, it became audible. Amber was telling him that he was a washed up actor. He was going to die a fat, lonely old man. Then you heard, you hit me with a can. You
heard Johnny say, "You hit me with a can," and then he came down the steps, and Amber was behind him, and she had a bottle in her hand, was removed, and there was a brief pause the moment, I think, of initial shock or uncertainty of why, that we were there. Neither Johnny nor Amber knew that we were there. He proceeded to walk back to the John Deere, and she again he was just sitting in the seat. Amber came up to him and was asking him to come back in the house, that she was sorry, please come back in the house. He didn't come out of the seat, and she was hugging and kissing him, and I love you, I love you. She was telling him I loved you. He didn't react. Johnny sat there, eventually got out of the John Deere, and proceeded to start to walk away. At that time, Amber started to grab at him and his shirt, and trying to pull him back to the house, just basically viciously trying to pull him back and get him back into the house, and yelling at him. And at that point, I was between them, and felt it was best, and I was getting worried about what was going to happen, and it was best that I remove him from the situation. And so CJ took Amber back to the house, and I walked Johnny over to the cafe, which was basically 30 seconds away from the house, because it was the only place I could take him to at the time.
And you mentioned that Ms. Heard was viciously trying to pull Mr. Depp back. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It was like clawing, grabbing at his clothes, grabbing his hair, trying to pull him back, like an angry, like he was leaving and come back. He couldn't leave in the vehicle because the keys had been taken out. So there wasn't a way for Johnny to drive away. The only way was for him to walk away, and it wasn't a pleasant situation of wanting him to not leave, and angry and yelling and just yelling, come back, don't leave, and things like that.
At any point, did Mr. Depp hit or touch Ms. Heard?
Objection leading.
All right, let's see an objection.
Ms. Roberts, how did Mr. Depp react to Ms. Heard viciously grabbing him?
He didn't. He stood there with his arms by his side, and he didn't do anything.
Okay. Ms. Roberts, when you were back in the cafe with Mr. Depp, what happened next?
I was concerned because I had heard him say that he'd gone.
Objection to her being concerned. That's not responsive.
I'll sustain as to concerned, all right?
Okay, Ms. Roberts, without testifying as how you felt, what did you observe when you went back to the cafe with Mr. Depp?
When we went back to the cafe, he had a mark across the bridge of his nose. I got a bag of ice to put on it so that it wouldn't swell, just to make sure that it wasn't bleeding. And he walked over to the love seat at the cafe, and he laid down and went to sleep. And CJ came back over, and I asked CJ to stay there for the remainder of the evening, for the remainder of the morning. And I left CJ inside the cafe, and I left Johnny on the couch.
When did you next see Ms. Heard?
That morning, I saw her that morning.
How close were you to Ms. Heard when you interacted with her the next morning?
Conversation, in a couple feet away.
When you saw her, how did she appear?
They had guests leaving, and it was kind of a normal morning, going down to the beach to see the guests leave.
What, if any, makeup was Ms. Heard wearing?
Again, I'm not sure if she wore makeup on the island. If it was very natural looking.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on Ms. Heard?
I didn't observe any.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on Mr. Depp?
The marking across the bridge of his nose.
When did Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp leave the island?
I believe they left that afternoon. The guests left in the morning, and I believe they left that afternoon.
After Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp left the island, what did you do next?
Our usual, we go into the buildings and we break them down. We empty out the refrigerators, garbage, take all the perishables out of the house, straighten the place up, take the linens away, things like that.
What did you observe when you went through that process?
The island was as it was when they arrived. The only thing that was different was there was the liquid on the deck with a can, I believe, of mineral spirits or something there next to it, which had leaked out onto the deck. And then in the over the railing were paintbrushes and art supplies, paintbrushes, paint tubes, big jars that the paints are in, and those were all scattered in the bush.
Ms. Roberts, when is the first time you provided testimony about this incident in December 2015?
I believe it was for another case in May 2020.
Ms. Roberts, how often have you seen Mr. Depp drink alcohol on the island?
He goes through periods of time where he's been here and he doesn't drink, and it's non-alcoholic Beck's or something like that. It varies. Sometimes he drinks when he's here, sometimes he doesn't.
How often have you seen Ms. Heard drink alcohol on the island?
She drank wine. She drank wine with her drink was wine with dinner, maybe in the afternoon, but I know definitely with dinner.
Did you observe Ms. Heard drinking alcohol when Mr. Depp was not drinking alcohol?
Objection, leading.
No, sustained is leading.
Okay. How often have you seen Mr. Depp drunk?
I would know he has a huge tolerance for alcohol. I haven't seen him passed out drunk or anything like that. So he drinks, but I haven't seen him passed out drunk.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Nothing further.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Roberts, the salary you receive for managing the Bahama Island is approximately $10,000 a month, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so that comes out to $120,000 a year? Correct? Okay. And you've been receiving that salary for many years, correct?
Correct.
Right. In fact, I think you got a raise to $10,010 in 2018. Do you remember that?
No, I don't know the exact number, but I know I get that a month.
Okay. And that's in addition to all of the expenses, correct? For running the island.
The expenses.
Of running the island.
I get a salary every month. I'm not sure what you're asking me.
So the other people that are on the island, to the extent they work, they get a different salary, right?
Yes.
Okay, and all of the expenses you have, you talked about what you have to do to provision the island and everything else and run it. All of those expenses are paid separately, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you said you've been managing this island for 15 years for Mr. Depp, is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
All right. Now, let's talk for a moment about those two videos that you testified to were part of the house. The first video was missing both the closet and the bathroom, correct?
I don't remember. I'd have to look at it again.
All right. And the second...
There was sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. You didn't come through. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think in the first video, the beads were the closet, and then there was the bathroom next to the closet.
Okay, that was
That's
the
what you asked me.
that was the second video.
Oh.
Do you know who?
Sorry.
Do you know who took those videos?
Oh, I did.
Okay. When did you take those videos?
Oh, it would have to be, I'm not sure, a couple of years ago, maybe longer. I'm not sure.
Okay. Did you take those videos for the UK trial?
I don't recall if it was for that.
Right. Is there a reason that the closet and the bathroom were left out of the first video?
No, I stood in the house and did a circle around of the house.
Okay. Who asked you to make that video?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Was it Mr. Waldman? Adam Waldman?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Can't recall?
I can't remember who asked me.
Okay.
No, I can't.
Okay. Now the second video, that shows the closet and then there's a door there. Would you agree that door opens up into a bathroom?
Next to the closet, yes.
Okay. And we don't have a video of the bathroom, correct?
I don't believe there was a video of the bathroom.
And no one asked you to make a video of the bathroom, correct?
Objection, relevance.
I'll overrule it for now. Okay.
Correct?
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if anybody asked me to. I don't believe I videotaped the bathroom.
Okay. And my question was, and no one asked you to videotape the bathroom, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let's talk for a moment about the logistics of the island. So, Mr. Depp's house, we've seen the inside of, and you said that the cafe was a 30-second walk, I think you said. How many yards?
Yeah. I don't know. I walk it. It's just outside his house through the parking lot and walkway to the cafe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, and the cafe is where Mr. Depp would regularly have his meals, correct?
Correct. All the guests would have their meals there.
Okay, including Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard if she was there, and their children, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and
For
then
dinners, yes.
and then you were located on the other side of the island, correct? That's where you stay?
Or I stay in the middle of the island, yes.
Okay, how far away is that from the cafe and the house?
Objection, compound.
I'll sustain the objection if you want.
How far away is it from the house?
Where I stay,
Yes.
probably a 3-minute golf cart ride,
Okay.
5-minute walk.
Okay. And then when other guests come, I think you were talking about tents. Do they stay in tents?
No, the tents were erected for the wedding, and then they were dismantled. And sometimes we would erect them if we were asked to, just in case somebody wanted to stay there. But people didn't stay in the tents; they stayed in the buildings here.
Okay. So how much accommodation can you handle in the buildings for other guests? I'm not talking about the house, Mr. Depp's house. We've seen that. But how many people can actually be accommodated in the buildings?
We have a 2-bedroom yurt on Brando Beach. We have a beach house which has the bed in it, and then we have what we call a roundhouse, which has a bed in it as well.
Okay. Now, when Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard were visiting, whether they had the children there or not, typically, would you bring the meals to the cafe for each of the meals?
No, sometimes I would take them to the house. It depended on where they wanted to eat.
All right, and then typically would you join them for the meal, or would you leave the meal and then come back and clean up afterwards?
Objection compound.
All right. I'll sustain the objection.
All right, we'll take that one at a time. Typically, would you bring the meals to them?
Myself or one of the workers here would take the meals.
Okay, how often was it you that would take them?
How often? Maybe every other day, every day. It depended on how, if people were eating in their buildings or eating together.
All right, and would you stay and eat the meal with them, or would you leave?
If we were invited for dinner, we would all eat together. Usually we would take the food to the places and leave.
Okay. And then would you be called to come pick them up?
No. We would sometimes go back in the evenings on our own and clean up and turn some of the lights off. And sometimes we would do it in the morning. It depended on what was happening.
Okay. So other than bringing the meals, and it could be you or somebody else, how often did you interact with Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard during the days when they were on the island?
On average, every day.
In what context other than delivering the meals and picking them up?
Oh, just see if anything was needed, if everything was all right, things like that. Generally passing them if they were walking or in the office or on the beach.
Okay. Now, would it be fair to say that you weren't spending 24/7 with them?
No, I didn't live with them, no.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you don't know what they were doing during the times that you weren't passing them by or bringing meals?
Yes, unless they were on the beach.
Okay.
Then I would know. But
So you wouldn't know what happened, what would be taking place within the house, for example, when you weren't there, correct?
correct.
And you wouldn't know whether Mr. Depp was taking drugs, correct?
Correct.
And you wouldn't know whether Mr. Depp was drinking, correct?
I would only know by cleaning up.
Okay. And you wouldn't know, well, you wouldn't know from cleaning up necessarily whether it was Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard, or somebody else, would you?
Objection compound.
Or what was,
Overruled, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Please continue.
unless I would know what it was by what was in the garbage or left out of who consumed or what was consumed, I would be able to know.
Okay. And you wouldn't know what arguments, if there were any, were taking place in that house behind closed doors, right?
Correct.
And you wouldn't know whether there was any kind of physical abuse that was taking place behind those closed doors, correct?
I wouldn't know. Correct.
Okay. Now, let me just take you for a moment to the December 2015 timeframe. How much advance notice are you typically given for when Mr. Depp and his entourage are going to arrive and for how long they're going to stay?
Objection compound.
All right, I'll sustain the objection.
All right, let's break it down. How much notice are you given when Mr. Depp and his entourage are coming?
It varies. Sometimes it's a couple days, sometimes it's a couple weeks.
So how much notice were you given in December of 2015 to who would be coming for Christmas on the Bahama Island?
I believe sometime in November
Okay.
for that trip.
All right. And in November, how many people were you told were coming for Christmas on the island?
I don't recall how many people.
It was a lot more than Amber, Johnny, Lily Rose, Jack, and Lily Rose's boyfriend, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
In fact, it was Amber's parents, correct?
I believe so.
And it was Rocky Pennington and Josh Drew, correct?
I believe they were on the list.
And Rocky Pennington's parents?
Yes, I believe they were on the list.
Do you recall them canceling?
Objection, hearsay.
I recall.
How is that hearsay?
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead.
I recall there was a change to the guests.
When did you learn of that?
I don't recall. Maybe a couple weeks after. Maybe it's beginning of December. Maybe middle of December. I'm not sure.
Do you recall if it was after December 15?
I don't recall.
Did you think that was a little strange that here these people were going to be at
Objection.
Christmas on the island and suddenly they cancel?
Objection, relevance.
I think it's highly relevant.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
What, if anything, were you told about why they canceled?
Objection, hearsay.
Party opponent admission.
Yep.
We've
Well,
laid
you
a
don't know.
foundation for that.
Okay. Who told you that Amber's parents, her best friend and fiance, and her best friend's parents were suddenly canceling coming for Christmas on the island?
Objection, compound.
I'll allow that. Go ahead.
I don't know who told me, but I did receive I did receive information that they weren't coming and somebody else was coming instead.
And who was that somebody else coming instead?
That it would be Alice and it would be Alice and Greg and the children and the nanny.
And they were coming later, right?
They would be joining. That I think was the words.
Okay. So on the December trip, you testified about a few arguments between Amber and Johnny, right? Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Okay. You weren't present when Johnny sustained the gash on his nose, correct?
I wasn't there. No.
Okay. And you weren't present when the mess was made through the paints that you've described, correct?
No.
And so you don't know whether there had been a physical altercation and that led to throwing a paint can to try to slow down Johnny, right?
No, I just heard yelling in the house.
Okay, but that yelling in the house wasn't necessarily the same time, was it? You don't know, do you?
No, it was all in the same. Okay, no.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the summer of 2013. Are you aware that Paul Bettany claims he's never met Amber?
Objection, relevance.
What's the
And calls for hearsay.
She testified that he was there on the island with her.
And calls for hearsay.
I can ask the question and see if she says.
All right, I'll allow the question. Go ahead.
Can you repeat it?
Are you aware that Paul Bettany has said that he never met Amber Heard?
No, I'm unaware. I don't know that.
Well, let's stay on the summer of 2013 if we can. Do you have a recollection of Amber and Johnny, Lily Rose and Jack taking one final trip on the yacht that Johnny was going to be selling to J.K. Rowling?
I don't know what year that was. I don't know what year that was, but I do remember the yacht being sold.
If I tell you it was July of 2013, does that help refresh your recollection? July 9?
Yeah,
All right. Now,
it doesn't. I just know the yacht was sold.
okay, and you made arrangements, did you not, for a captain to captain the yacht and for them to go out on the yacht?
No, I didn't have any responsibility for the yacht and the crew on the yacht.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of being called because Lily Rose and Jack were upset and they wanted to leave the yacht and have a helicopter take them away?
Objection, hearsay, and compound.
I'm asking whether she has a recollection of this.
I'll allow the question.
Can you ask me it again?
Do you have a recollection of Lily Rose and Jack being upset on the yacht and wanting to leave it immediately, so you arranged for a helicopter to come in to fly them away with Amber?
Objection, compound.
I'll allow it. Okay, let's just hear.
I don't know if Lily Rose and Jack were upset. I do know that I did arrange for transportation off the island at the time.
And in fact, Amber went with Lily Rose, correct?
It was Amber and her friend and Lily Rose.
Okay. And Jack decided at the last minute to stay back, correct?
I don't know if he decided last minute. He stayed.
Okay. Do you recall Lily Rose telling you that she was upset because her father was drinking and trying to hide it from him?
Objection, hearsay.
I'm asking whether she has a
I'll
recollection.
sustain the objection. to
Okay.
that.
Then I'll ask the next one. Do you recall Mr. Depp passing out in the sand face first?
I recall that he was passed out on the beach. He was out on the beach. Yes.
Okay. And do you recall Jack calling you because he was concerned?
Objection, hearsay.
That's just asking if he called. I haven't asked what he said.
No, you did. I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of Jack being present when Mr. Depp was passed out face first in the sand?
Yes.
And do you have a recollection of Jack being upset?
I don't have a recollection of him being upset.
Do you have a recollection of him being happy about it?
No, I didn't speak with Jack about it.
Okay. But you recall that Mr. Depp was passed out face first in the sand, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about makeup for a moment. So you don't know what type of makeup regimen Amber uses every day, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, you don't know, you said at one point you're not sure, but it's a natural look. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And would you agree that there are a number of different types of makeup you can use that would still give you a natural look?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll allow it.
I'm guessing there is, yes.
Okay. Okay. And there's sun in the Bahamas, right?
Most of the time.
Do you know what Amber wears for sunscreen?
I think it was, at one point I had a brand Shishido or something like that was on the island that we provided.
And do you know whether Amber brought her own as well?
I don't know.
Do you know whether Amber had a skin condition?
I wasn't told.
Okay. But I take it you didn't ask.
No, I wouldn't have asked if somebody had a skin condition.
Okay. The wedding. The wedding was planned at sunset, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, it went forward at sunset, correct?
It went earlier. It was earlier than sunset.
So your recollection is that there's no sunset pictures at the wedding?
I mean,
Okay.
there was sunset pictures.
Okay. So, last couple questions. The makeup or not makeup, you were asked whether you observed any injuries on Amber in the December 2015 timeframe. Do you believe Amber would cover up bruises to hide them from the kids?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll sustain this.
Do you have any understanding, based on your knowledge of Amber, whether she would try to cover up any bruises or cuts
Same
to
objection.
keep them from the kids?
I'll sustain the objection.
You said that you didn't believe that Amber was wearing much makeup, but you said she participated in a photo shoot in December 2015. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Do you know whether Amber was wearing any makeup for a photo shoot?
I'm not sure the part that I saw. She was in and out of the water.
Do you know whether Amber would want to show bruises or cuts in a photo shoot?
Objection calls for speculation.
I'll sustain the objection.
I have no further questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, redirect. Redirect.
Ms. Roberts, how many times have you seen Mr. Depp consume drugs?
Objection, leading.
All right, sustained.
Ms. Bredehoff asked you about Mr. Depp passed out on the beach. How would you describe Mr. Depp when you saw him on the beach?
He was passed out. I picked him up and brushed him off, and I left him underneath I believe he was in a hammock, and I believe he had fallen asleep, or he was asleep, and the hammock had overturned, and I picked him up and brushed him off and left him underneath the lanai with Jack.
Okay, no further questions.
All
Thank
right,
you,
is
Ms.
this witness
Roberts.
subject to recall, Ms. Roberts?
Yes, potentially.
All right.
So we'll
Ms. Roberts, since you're subject to recall, did not discuss your testimony with anybody and just did not watch anything about this case, okay, ma'am?
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, your next witness.
Dr. Shannon Curry. She'll come right now.
Dr. who?
Shannon Curry.
Can you, is it C-U-R-R-Y?
C-U-R-R-Y. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Curry.
Good morning.
I'm Wayne Dennison. Could you state your full name for the record?
Shannon Curry.
What do you do for a living?
I am a clinical and forensic psychologist.
What's your educational background?
I started college at Georgetown University. I then transferred to the University of California, Irvine, where I received my bachelor's degree in psychology and social behavior. I completed my master's degree in psychology at Pepperdine University. I went on to complete my doctoral degree in clinical psychology at Pepperdine University, which included several training rotations at different practicum sites. Those are essentially clinical rotations we do to learn various types of psychology. You learn how to do psychological assessment, counseling, etc., and you do that in a variety of different settings. And then I completed a year-long doctoral internship at an American Psychological Association accredited doctoral internship. You do this year before you get your degree, and that was at Tripler Army Medical Center. It's traditionally a military internship. They did admit 2 civilians. I was lucky enough to be one of them. I then completed 2 years of postdoctoral training at Hawaii State Hospital, a locked forensic psychology facility, and that's where you essentially have individuals with severe mental illness who have committed crimes.
Have you done any additional coursework or educational work?
I have. So after I completed my doctorate and my postdoctoral training, I obtained it's called a postdoctoral Master of Science degree in clinical psychopharmacology. That is for partial fulfillment of prescription privileges, meaning that it's part of what we need to be able to prescribe medications as a psychologist, because psychologists don't traditionally prescribe, and we can do that with certain military jurisdictions in other states. I also obtained advanced training in the Gottman method of couples therapy. I completed all 3 levels of training, and then I'm also a Gottman educator for several workshops involving helping parents learn how to prepare to bring their baby home and helping couples without serious problems improve their relationships.
Eric, what's the Gottman method?
The Gottman method is a highly research-based method of couples therapy. It's very structured, so different than what many people expect when they think about couples therapy. I always tell my clients I don't want them to come in, just tell each other all their problems, and then have an awkward, silent drive home. In this therapy, they come in, they complete a really structured assessment in the beginning. So they complete a bunch of questions. It gives me a ton of information about their relationship before we even get started, and really identifies the areas we're going to target with structured interventions during each session. I think of it almost like a class.
Okay. Did you get, in the course of your education, any specialized training?
Any what?
Specialized training?
I did. So my internship specifically was dedicated to essentially working with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic stress. A lot of my training has been with psychological assessment and testing, and then my training during practicum and then in my postdoctoral work was dedicated to working with trauma populations and also conducting forensic psychological assessments. Oftentimes, forensic psychological assessments actually refers to doing testing and an interview and a couple other things for purposes related to law. So it's the application of psychology to the courts, to legal issues. And sometimes that also involves doing assessments for the military to determine whether somebody has sustained a mental disability after combat.
You indicated that you did some work at Tripler. What's Tripler and what's the work you did?
So Tripler Army Medical Center is a hospital in Honolulu, Hawaii. If anybody's ever gotten to have a vacation in Hawaii, it's a giant pink building there. And it's one of the top training sites for military psychologists. I was very, very lucky to be able to train there. They have wonderful funding and a lot of new research going on, particularly for PTSD, but really for all areas of mental health. While I was there, I did rotations in family psychology, so doing family therapy. I worked with children, but I also did a neuropsychology rotation, learning really the ins and outs of advanced psychological assessment, identifying not just mental issues, mental illness, but also traumatic brain injuries after trauma, and doing those PTSD evaluations, and then also working with service members who were struggling with a whole host of issues, military stressors, normal life stressors, and then also those who sustained tremendous trauma from combat.
Do you still continue to work with the military?
I do, actually. My practice is very focused on military service members, veterans, and their families.
Okay. What work have you done in prior litigation matters?
Well, most of my litigation, if we're talking about civil work, that has mostly been reports. So this is my first time testifying in a civil matter. The majority of my forensic work has been in criminal law or providing psychological assessments, and then I produce a really methodical report, which is typically reviewed by a judge, and a determination is made, or usually there's a settlement beforehand.
Okay. Do you work in connection with any particular courts?
I do. So I am actually not sure if I'm on the list anymore in Honolulu, but I am a certified forensic evaluator for the state of Hawaii, which means that I have been appointed by the court to conduct evaluations for matters that are presented. And then I'm also on the list of forensic evaluators in several courts in Southern California. And then I'm contracted by the military, the Department of Defense, now and again for evaluations of PTSD from service members.
Okay, you mentioned PTSD a couple of times now.
Yes.
What are you referring to there?
So PTSD is a mental illness. It can develop after a person has been exposed to a traumatic event. And our diagnostic statistical manual, the DSM, is sort of the authoritative manual of mental illnesses. It's considered our Bible of mental illness. We go there for diagnoses. And according to that, there's a specific type of trauma that a person must experience for them to be able to qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD. And that's an event that is life-threatening. It can also involve sexual assault, and you can experience that either directly, but you can also be traumatized if you've seen it happen to somebody else, or if it's happened unexpectedly or violently to somebody close to you, a family member or a friend. And then there's also a provision for people who are first responders. If they're encountering really traumatic information regularly, that qualifies as a trauma. Now, there are a number of symptoms that can develop.
Sure. We'll talk about that some
Okay.
more. Do you hold any credentials relevant to the work that you do?
Well, I am a licensed psychologist.
Where?
In California and Hawaii.
Okay. And any other certifications or other credentials?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head other than the training with the Gottman method of couples therapy.
Okay. Have you worked with the Hawaii Department of Courts and Corrections?
Yes, I have.
In what capacity?
Well, so that I guess would be a credential. So I am a certified forensic evaluator for the state of Hawaii.
In connection with your doctorate, was there a research component?
There was. So would you like me to tell you about it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I conducted a research study while I was at Pepperdine completing my doctorate. It's called a dissertation. So when you're obtaining your doctorate, you contribute something to the scientific field that you're in. And typically that involves doing what we call novel science. So you're doing an experiment, you're finding out new information and helping the field progress. So I did research in Peru, and I was essentially looking at the effectiveness of a therapy intervention there for kids who were growing up in this community called Ayacucho, which was exposed to 20 years of guerrilla warfare, the longest guerrilla war in the history of the world. And there were a lot of issues in that community, tremendous trauma. And my research was around finding interventions that were really effective for that community.
Where do you work now?
I work for the Curry Psychology Group.
What does the Curry Psychology Group do?
We're a multi-specialty mental health center, so we have neuropsychologists who do testing for kids. We have therapists, individual therapists, couples therapists, family therapists. We even have a meditation teacher. We basically try to meet the needs of our community, and we highly specialize in working with military personnel and their families.
Who's the Curry and Curry Psychology Group?
I'm Dr. Curry.
How many people work for you?
As of right now, I believe it's 13.
How long have you been doing this kind of work?
For about 15 years.
How much of your therapy practice focuses on treating individuals?
I would say about half of it is individuals, half is couples.
Okay. Do you do any training of students?
I do.
What's that?
So we have several unlicensed professionals at our office, and they're earning their additional hours so that they can get licensed. So they're able to see clients, and then I meet with them regularly to supervise them, discuss their cases, provide them with information about different diagnoses, interventions, and treatment methods.
How did you get involved in this case?
I was contacted by Ms. Camille Vasquez, one of the attorneys for Mr. Depp.
Okay, and what was the nature of the contact?
Ms. Vasquez called me and indicated that she might be interested in having me meet the legal team so that I could discuss my expertise and possibly provide my opinions related to the matter.
Yeah. What were you asked to provide expert opinion on?
So initially, my role that I understood at the time was to review the case materials and provide my opinions regarding anything that I noticed that was consistent or even inconsistent with the psychological science that exists today on intimate partner violence in Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard's relationship.
All right, you used a phrase there, intimate partner violence. What are you talking about?
So there are a multitude of different definitions depending on the source or the state. But essentially, intimate partner violence is abuse. It could be physical, psychological, and it's from one partner to another in an intimate relationship.
Okay. Did your role in this case evolve over time?
Yes, it shifted. So I was retained at the end of January 2021, and then had just barely begun to review the documents. The case was postponed, and then in October 2021, I was asked by counsel to provide a psychological evaluation of Ms. Heard.
Okay. Were you ever asked to do a psychological evaluation of Mr. Depp?
No.
Okay.
What types of documents did you consider in this analysis?
So I reviewed quite a few documents as part of my evaluation. That included all of the case documents, Ms. Heard's medical records by Dr. Kipper, her prior mental health treatment records. I believe I reviewed records from Dr. Amy Banks, Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, Dr. Connell Cohen, and also a significant portion of my review involved notes from nurse Erin Filati, at the time Erin Borum, who spent a significant time with Ms. Heard in her direct company. I also reviewed exhibits, quite a few audio recordings, a video recording, several video recordings, or possibly photographs, I might be getting them confused, and multiple witness statements, testimony, and declarations.
Did there come a time when you met directly with Ms. Heard?
Yes, I did. So in conducting my evaluation, I met with Ms. Hurd on 2 separate dates, December 10th and December 17th, 2021.
Approximately how much time have you spent with Ms. Hurd?
So the evaluation, we spent 12 hours directly with one another. However, there were more hours involved in the evaluation with some breaks. So we spent 7 hours together on the first day, December 10th. Not necessarily together because there was a 1 hour lunch break and about a half hour with breaks split up through the day. And then on the 17th, we spent a little more than 8 hours in the evaluation from start to finish, with a 1 hour break and another half hour of breaks distributed throughout the day.
As a result of the work that you performed, did you form any opinions with respect to Ms. Hurd?
I did.
What were those opinions?
The results of Ms. Hurd's evaluation supported 2 diagnoses: borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder.
What is a diagnosis?
A diagnosis is a way that that psychologists, psychiatrists, anybody in the mental health field thinks about a disorder. It helps us to communicate a set of symptoms that a person is experiencing, and along with that set of symptoms, it tells other professionals a lot about how those symptoms might have developed, how that person might behave, perceive the world. It also drives treatment. The real purpose is to determine what sort of interventions will be most effective for the person.
Yeah. Previously, you made reference to, I think you called it the DSM-5. What's
Yes.
that?
So the DSM-5, that stands for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, version 5, and that contains every diagnosis we use in mental health, and it's the authoritative manual of mental diagnoses.
Is performing diagnoses something you typically do in your line of work?
Yes.
Thank you. So you referenced 2 personality disorders. What's a personality disorder?
To understand a personality disorder, I think it can be helpful first to kind of define personality. So personality, something we take for granted, but these are the traits, the characteristics, the way we think, we feel, and we act that make us who we are. And these traits are pretty stable over time and across situations. We might, be sure to mind our P's and Q's when we're meeting somebody new, but overall, if somebody were to describe us or if we were to describe ourselves, we have a pretty good sense of who we are. Sometimes an easy way to think of it is imagining how you might describe a brother or sister or a child if you have children. Their personalities are pretty clear to you. A personality disorder is some sort of dysfunction in those enduring traits. So as opposed to other types of mental illness, when you think about something like depression, that's episodic. It comes and it goes, and when it's treated with medication, it can pretty much be completely mitigated or minimized in a person's life, and their personality is still there, separate from the depression. When we have a personality disorder, there are going to be disturbances in several different areas that are visible in almost all different facets of their life.
Is there a manner in which personality disorders are commonly diagnosed?
Yes, so they can be diagnosed in a treating environment. Treating psychologist or a therapist or a psychiatrist simply does a diagnostic interview, which involves assessing multiple areas of a person's history back down through childhood.
I'm going to stop you for a second.
Yes.
What's a treating environment?
Sometimes I'll slip into these words, I apologize. So a treating environment, in therapy, if somebody is going in for treatment, the mental health provider will ask them questions to find out what sort of symptoms they've experienced and what sort of things have occurred in their life that might be consistent with these disorders, or rule out these disorders, prove that there's no reason for these disorders to be considered. They might also pay attention to their observations of the client over time and new information the client provides them. The most reliable way, however, to ever come about a diagnosis really is through a comprehensive psychological assessment. And I might use the words assessment, examination, testing interchangeably. They all mean the same thing. It's combining information from multiple different sources. One main source is psychological testing using validated objective measures. That means that they've been tested, they've been shown to be accurate for testing what you want to test, and in the environment you're testing. So there are measures specific for court environments where someone might respond differently. You integrate that with the same interview I was telling you that people would do for therapy. We do that as well. And then in a courtroom setting, you're going to look at all the legal records, all of those documents, corroborating information to sort of check your hypotheses that may be developing, and also check against the examinee's statements to confirm whether you have enough evidence of a certain diagnosis.
So what's a clinical interview?
A clinical interview is a very comprehensive interview. It includes a person's entire life history, as well as very specifically looks at any symptoms they might have. This can start as far back as birth. You might find out if there were any issues with their delivery, any genetic issues, any intellectual issues. How did they do? What was their home life like? How was discipline handled? What's their relationship with their primary caregivers? Were they raised by an aunt, an uncle, their parents? How many siblings do they have? How do they get along with their siblings? How many times did they have to move? Was there any abuse? Did they have any really significant life experiences that come to mind when they think about their childhood? How were they as a student? Did they need special services? Did they get in trouble at school? And you do this, you continue on high school. What were their hobbies? Did they play sports? How many friends did they have? Did they have any trouble keeping those friendships? Then you get into adulthood. Did they go to college? Did they not go to college? How come? What sort of jobs have they held? How did those jobs go? How did they end? That's always an important question. What sort of romantic relationships have they been involved in? How do they identify sexually, culturally? Let's see, what else? What sort of symptoms have they experienced? You go through the entire gamut of some of the main symptoms. You might screen for depression, any disorganized thinking. That means thinking that isn't necessarily in touch with reality, and any current distress they may be having today.
How did you conclude that Ms. Heard suffers from the personality disorders that you identified?
So there was information that supported it from multiple sources. I conducted testing, including one of the main tests that I used. She obtained scores that were consistent with those diagnoses. And then I also, there was evidence of those diagnoses in her records and in her self-report.
Okay.
All right, Council, why don't we just go ahead and pause for a second while we go ahead and take our morning recess. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take our 15-minute morning recess. Do not discuss the case and do not do any outside research, okay?
Your Honor, when would you like to reconvene?
Give me a moment, sir. And Dr. Since you're on the stand now, do not
Okay, everyone, they're getting ready to take their morning resource break.
Okay.
And during this time, they mute the mics. We want to stay with the coverage. And so if you want to grab a cup of coffee and a snack, they'll be taking about a 15-minute break. So far this morning, we've heard from the house manager of the island that Johnny Depp owned. Want to know, what are your thoughts on that? They also discussed what was going on during the island and all of that nature. So what are your thoughts on the trial so far? Who do you feel that's winning this case? And do you have favorites on either side? We're neutral here. We're just here listening to the evidence. As you might notice, during the trial, we have the closed caption on, and that's because sometimes it's hard to hear the feed, and it's very rare, but sometimes it's hard to hear the feed. So we put the closed captioning on so you can read along with the coverage. They will be on break. wants to know what your thoughts are. Type in the chat. What are your thoughts? Who is winning? Who is the prevailing at this time? So far, we have only heard from Johnny Depp's team as far as presenting their case. Amber Heard's team has not presented their case. They have only cross-examined the witnesses that's been called by Johnny Depp's team. And so what are you thinking? Do you think Johnny Depp will prevail, or do you think that Amber Heard will prevail? Has Johnny Depp presented enough evidence to prove that there was defamation? Because remember, the case is about defamation and the article that Amber Heard made. I know that we're hearing a lot of traumatic testimony regarding abuse. However, the case on he's suing her for defamation for the article that she's written, and she is countersuing Johnny Depp because his attorneys called her a liar, and so they are suing. She is suing them for $100 million. Johnny Depp is suing her for $50 million. Do you think that there will be resolved? Do you think that there will be just no resolve? Will Johnny win? Will Amber win? Well, we're going to let you take a quick break. We're going to stay live with this coverage. And so we definitely want to stay live here while they're on break. Want to know your thoughts. And as we stream live, we would do minimum talking. If you want commentary, there are channels that have the commentary up there. But I find that when I'm watching a case, sometimes I just want to hear what's going on. I don't want the commentary included. At this time, I'm providing commentary because they're on break. Other than that, there will be silence, and I will be asking questions in the chat, offering you an opportunity to share your thoughts in the chat, and which we will show on screen if you desire. But we want to know how you are feeling about this. Many people have their sides. We don't have a side, as I stated. We are streaming this case for the knowledge of the courtroom. One thing that we have found is that it has been very beneficial to SAVEDnews audience that they want to see these types of things. But I would encourage you to go watch this video. And this is regarding I'm going to put it in the chat, the link to the chat. You can watch this video on when regarding the Melania disagreeing and showing that the makeup case. We did the video that regarding Amber Heard was busted on that. So in the chat, there's a 3-minute video that we did that might interest you while we're on break to watch that. It's entitled Busted, Melania Cosmetics Debunks Amber Heard's Statement with Receipts. And definitely encourage you to watch that video, as it is very informative on what the cosmetic company did. The Amber Heard's attorney stood in opening statement and held up a makeup case of Melania products, and Melania products came and said that her attorney said that this is the product that Amber Heard used to cover up her makeup. And I mean, her face from the bruises, she carried it in her purse every day. And then Melania Products Cosmetics came out and did a video debunking what the attorney had said in opening statement. The attorney said that Amber Heard would testify that this was the product that she used. Melania Products came out and stated that the makeup was not released until 2017, which December of 2017, which is more than a year after the divorce. So we encourage you, the link is in the chat, to look at that video. It's only 3 minutes, and give you a little idea, because I'm positive that the defense, Johnny Depp's attorneys, will address this, because it was brought up in opening statement, and the attorney for Amber Heard stated that Amber Heard would testify to this. Now, some people are saying, well, attorneys use props for during a case. Yes, that's true. However, the attorneys don't use props that state this is the product that Amber Heard used. They'll say something like, she used a makeup case similar to the product that I'm holding. This attorney identified specifically that the product that she was holding in her hand was definitely the product that Amber Heard used to cover up her her bruises, alleged bruises from Johnny Depp, and that it was 2 years that she carried it in her purse throughout their relationship to cover up bruises. Now, as I stated, check out that video. We will be also continuing to stream the Depp Heard case going forward, because we've received a lot of inquiries and people interested in this case, in this trial. So I'm interested in hearing what is going to happen and come forth. As of now, we have an expert on the stand, and it seems like we're getting into expert testimony, which is very interesting. It can be sometimes hard to follow, but I find that Dr. Curry, who has taken the stand now, is very thorough and easy to follow as far as her explanations of things. And thus far, so she just got on the stand. She covered her credentials, her business, and also the fact that she did make an assessment for a diagnosis on Amber Heard. She met with Amber Heard and diagnosed 2 personality disorders for Amber Heard. She met with her on 2 separate days. I believe she said December 10th and December 17th of 2021. So it is going to be very interesting as to what the doctor has to say. Now, she also stated that she did not diagnose Johnny Depp. And this is going to be interesting also because of the fact that she was hired by Johnny Depp's team. So it's very exciting to watch a case unfold right before our eyes, regardless of which side you're on. It's good to see how the court process goes and what happens during a case and the objections. Now, this is a civil case, which is very much different than a criminal case. And so the rules of the game are a lot different than, let's say, a criminal case would be. But we are going to watch this, and we're going to, share our ideas and our thoughts through what is happening at this case. So like I said, please feel free during the course of this trial. The chat is yours. Type your questions, type your comments, talk amongst yourselves. You are more than willing and able and welcome to do that. We want to hear what you think and what your assessment is. Some of the testimony thus far has been triggering. to a lot of people. And this is day 9. They have estimated that this trial will take 6 weeks. And that is due, how they come about the estimate is assessing which witnesses will be called, how long they anticipate the witnesses being on the stand, opening and closing arguments, and also, objections and things of that nature, along with exhibits. There have been a ton of exhibits during the course of this trial thus far. We've had audio exhibits, video exhibits, and no video, but then, of course, text messages, emails. There have been a lot of exhibits. I believe as of yesterday afternoon, there was over 800 exhibits in the trial. So that is a lot of evidence for the jury to look over. It is estimated that the jury will take probably about 2 weeks, additional 2 weeks, once the case, they have rested the case and the judge gives the jury instructions. There is a part that the judge have to rule on regarding the metadata, because Amber Heard has not turned over all of her texts, all of her email information to the courts. So the judge has not made a decision on that. And if Johnny Depp's team win that, then what will happen is one of the possibilities is that it would be a part of the jury instructions for the jury to know that Amber Heard only gave a part of the evidence as far as her recordings, her text messages, and that they can weigh it based on that information, because that means that a lot of information is missing. One of the things also that we have heard is why was there so many recordings from Amber Heard? And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that she has done an excessive amount of recordings? Do you think that it's normal in a relationship to record your partner that much? Now, Johnny Depp did admit that he was the one that initially started recording. However, he did not record in excess of that time, but that was something that the counselor had suggested. I believe that's what he said. And also, one of the things that's in question is where Amber Heard recorded, and also her not letting him know that they were recording. Now, the recordings that she made in California are illegal, because California is a 2-party state, which means both parties must consent to being recorded. The prosecution and the defense, both Johnny Depp's team and Amber Heard team, agreed to allow the recordings in to support their case. However, like I stated before, there is a major issue with the metadata of Amber Heard's recordings that she has submitted to the court, because one, she did not submit all of her recordings, all of her text messages, her phone to the courts. Also, since there is no metadata, there is no way to track exactly what day the recordings were recorded on. So it's going to be interesting how the courts address that. And like I stated, there is a ruling that the judge has not determined yet regarding the metadata issue. So we're just here. They're on break. They should be back from break pretty soon. And we really thank you at Save News for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and share the video if you get an opportunity so other people can see. But like I stated before, once they come back from break, our commentary will end like it did before, and we will just be looking at the actual trial. I do not do commentary while the trial is going on. And also what will happen once they do break for lunch, we will end this particular stream, and then we will start a new stream when they return from lunch. But right now they're just on a break, and we're going to keep this stream up. So continue to stay tuned with us and enjoy. Like I said, feel free to type your comments in the chat. Who are you pulling for? Do you think that as of now, because we can't speak really on Amber Heard's case because she hasn't started presenting her side, what are your thoughts on who is winning? Do you feel that Johnny Depp is proving his case? Do you feel that there's a lot? I think that, now this is just my personal opinion here, I'm going to say, win or lose, I think Johnny Depp's goal was to get his story out. And I'm not going to say I even think that, because that's what he said on the stand. That's what he testified to, is that he wanted to get his side out because Amber Heard has had the opportunity through, court filings, divorce, and everything to get her side, excuse me, of what happened out into the public. So I believe that that's one of his main goal, is to let his voice be heard. I also, listening to this testimony, we will definitely pursue a show regarding domestic violence. Sometimes we have, we hear about domestic violence against women, and but very rarely do we talk a lot about domestic violence against men. Domestic violence against anyone is absolutely horrible and should not be tolerated. But this is opening a doorway and a voice for those men that have been victims of domestic violence. All right. Well, it looks like the case has started back, and we're going to end our commentary so you can watch the case on screen. And it is very interesting. Again, we appreciate you joining and allowing Save News TV into your homes. And here comes the case. Enjoy, everybody. God bless. We'll be talking to you soon. I think the jury is coming in now. All is rising for the jury. And Dr. Curry's testimony will continue.
All right, you have your seat. And your next question, sir?
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Curry, before the break, you were talking about some of the factors that you considered in determining that Ms. Heard suffers from personality disorders. And one of them, I think the last one you said before you left, was self-report. What do you mean by that?
So the self-report would be things that Ms. Heard indicated to me specifically. So there were a couple of characteristics that she noted in her self-report that were consistent with these personality disorders. The first was actually my own behavioral observations of her based on her self-report. So one of the hallmark characteristics of histrionic personality disorder is sort of a overly dramatic presentation. We call this impressionistic speech. So it tends to be very flowery. It uses a lot of descriptive words like magical, wonderful, and it can go on for quite some time, and yet it really lacks any substance. So at the end, you're left wondering what was just said or what the answer is to the actual question. So that occurred a number of times, and it also represented the quick shifts you'll see between emotions. So she would suddenly be one way, and then she would become very animated or very sad. And when people are displaying these emotions with this personality disorder, there's a sense of shallowness to it. People who are observing them will feel like it's almost play acting, and they might not be able to put their finger on it. But part of it is because of the rapidness with which the person can switch emotions, and also the lack of substance. They don't really refer to, I feel this way. They might describe emotions, they might describe events, but very rarely, and Ms. Hurd did not say, I feel vulnerable. She never really indicated a vulnerable feeling of her own. Then the substance of her self-report. So when I was asking her information about her history.
We're going to ask more about that later. I was just trying to get a sense of what a self-report was.
Oh, okay.
What psychological tests did you perform?
Okay, so psychological tests, I'll just go in order. So first of all, I asked her a couple questions from something called the mini mental status exam. That's really just a fancy way of saying that I wanted to make sure that she was alert and oriented to, we call it person, place, and time. That means she knew who she was, she knew who I was, she knew where we were, and she knew the date. That way I can ensure that she's able to participate in the evaluation and understand what's happening. I then administered something called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2. The 2 means that it's the second edition. And this is something we call an objective measure. So it asks 567 questions, more statements, and the person either agrees or disagrees with them, how much the statement represents them. And this test has been around since 1943. There are more than 10,000 studies showing that it is appropriate for determining somebody's personality traits. It measures all of those things I sort of mentioned, how a person thinks, feels, and behaves in multiple different aspects of their lives. It also measures very accurately any signs of mental illness or dysfunction. And the reason I also really like this test, whenever you're using a test for an evaluation that's going to be used in a forensic setting, people have a lot of incentive to present themselves in a way that's going to benefit their case. And they may want to look like they're sicker than they really are. They may want to look much healthier than they really are. And some of those incentives, they may not even realize that they're intending to do that. So it can be conscious or unconscious, but you really need to have a test that can check for that. And the MMPI-2 has a set of validity scales, we call them. These are scales that measure really the truthfulness and accuracy with which a person is approaching the test. And these scales on this particular test have been so well researched over many decades that they've become very nuanced, and they can tell us a lot about if somebody's, for instance, exaggerating. Are they elevating one of the scales that shows that they're exaggerating on purpose? Are they exaggerating in a manner that's more like a cry for help? Are they exaggerating in a manner that's clever and sophisticated or more obvious? And then the same exact thing goes for trying to minimize symptoms. We have a number of scales that can show us all the different, if somebody's trying to say they're the most wonderful person on earth, or if they're just trying to deny problems, and if they're doing that again in a very clever way or more of an obvious way. So that test was my choice for this case. There's one other reason I'd like to add, is that part of my evaluation was, one of the reasons was to assess whether Ms. Hurd has post-traumatic stress disorder, which I told you about earlier, as a result of the incidents that she's alleged occurred by Mr. Depp. And that's a really tough disorder to find out if somebody's faking it or not. It's one of the most easily faked disorders. Most of us know what it feels like to feel anxious. And a lot of people have seen war movies and movies that depict somebody having PTSD. In fact, some research has shown that if you give someone a diagnostic checklist and said, show that you have PTSD, they can do it 96% of the time, just someone on the street. So you really need a test that's very sensitive to that. And the MMPI-2 has been shown in multiple studies to be excellent at detecting those attempts.
Okay, you keep using MMPI-2. That's the abbreviation that you folks use for?
I'm sorry if I hadn't said that. That's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
What other psychological testing did you perform?
So I also performed the clinician-administered PTSD scale, -5, and that -5 links it to the diagnosis for PTSD in our current diagnostic manual, the 5th version. To do that test, you first administer something called the Life Events Checklist. And the Life Events Checklist, both of these tests, by the way, were developed by the National Center for PTSD with the Department of Veterans Affairs. But the Life Events Checklist lists 16 different very stressful life events that people can go through that are often can be associated with developing PTSD. And then it also has a 17th item that you can fill in if you feel like you've been through something really difficult that wasn't included. Now, I like to also add something called the Life Events Checklist 5 interview, which digs a little bit deeper into the person's childhood as well to find out if there's so many different things that can be difficult growing up. And also, it's very important that you have the person determine which of the events they've listed, let's say they have a number of different types of traumas, which one do they feel like was the most traumatic for them? Which one still causes them to feel distressed when they talk about it? And sometimes they can't just identify one. And then that leads to your next decision. So if they have multiple different similar types of events, like seeing combat, then you might use that as the worst one, the multiple similar. So that looks like you describe an anchor, we call it, to do the testing, and we would maybe describe the anchor as the worst of my combat experience, okay? Now, if somebody had multiple different traumas from different times in their life, like childhood abuse, and then went to combat and had some horrible things happen there, you would do the clinician-administered PTSD scale test, the one that comes after. You do one for the childhood event and a separate one for the adulthood event.
Does this clinician-administered PTSD scale have a handy abbreviation?
It does.
Okay.
We'll call it the CAPS 5. That's actually what it goes by.
Okay. How common is the use of the MMPI-2 in your profession?
The MMPI-2 is actually the most commonly used assessment worldwide by mental health professionals and in forensic settings for the court.
Why'd you use it?
I used it for that purpose and for its excellent validity in those settings across genders, across ethnicities, for different reasons. And when I keep saying validity, by the way, what I mean is accuracy, and I'll try to work that in. But then also for detecting the accuracy with which a person reports PTSD.
Okay. Is that scaled in some way?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Does that make use of a scale in some way?
The MMPI-2, do you mean specifically for PTSD?
Yes.
There's actually a combination of scales you want to look for. You would never make the diagnosis just based on one scale alone, or even on the test alone. You'd integrate other data.
All right. How did you administer the MMPI-2 to Ms. Hurd?
I provided her the test on an iPad. She essentially had her own little desk area and then an iPad. She hits start, it provides her with the instructions, and then it gives her 567 statements in order. For each one, she taps true or false.
What did you learn about Ms. Hurd from the results of the MMPI-2?
Quite a bit. I wrote up a 25-page interpretation outline. It has numerous scales. So one of the reasons I like this measure so much is that it can tell you so much about multiple different traits and tendencies and mental issues. One of the primary things I learned was that she had a very sophisticated way of minimizing any personal problems. I also learned that she tends to, well, there were a number of characteristics that were consistent with the eventual diagnoses, but some of the primary characteristics, and I'm going to try to condense 25 pages here, were essentially externalization of blame, tending to have a lot of inner hostility that is attempted to be controlled, a tendency to be very self-righteous, but to also deny that self-righteousness and to judge others critically against these sort of high standards for moral value, but also to deny doing that, essentially to claim that one is very non-judgmental and accepting and yet very full of rage, really. And these aren't facts, but her scores essentially correlated, so they were consistent with other people who obtained these scores who have been shown through many, many, many studies to have these very specific traits. So externalization of blame, a lot of inner anger and hostility, sometimes that anger among these groups with similar scores, these people might have that anger kind of explode out at times. They tend to be very passive aggressive. They may be self-indulgent, very self-centered. They could use manipulation tactics to try to get their needs met, very needy of attention, acceptance, approval. They tend to distance people who are close to them. Initially, they may seem very charming. They're very socially sophisticated, actually. That was a major component on there. They have a capacity to kind of offer some of their faults, but in a way, but only the ones that people think of lightly and can all relate to. And so they can present as very fair and balanced, but in actuality, they really might be very judgmental of others and unaware of problems in their behavior and their thinking.
So after you provide the examination via the iPad, what do you do?
So once they've completed the test, you can have it scored by the computer immediately. It's a very, very complex test to interpret, but right away you get a list of what's called critical items, and these are just some, a couple of the items, the statements that are presented that are more clearly symptom-based, and I always follow up with the examinee. Some of these might have to do with suicide, some of them might have to do with other symptoms that you just like to get a little bit more information on, because sometimes an examinee might tell you they're completely fine when you're doing your interview with them and that they have no symptoms. And then when they take the test, it says that they're having trouble sleeping, or they struggle with nausea all the time, or they feel very anxious. And so you want to follow up on that.
Okay. What's a code type?
A code type, let me think of how to explain this very, very simply. So the main scales, and I keep referring to scales, these are just the main scores that come up on this test. We can refer to them as codes. And when I was saying that Ms. Hurd's scores could be compared to certain groups of people that had been researched before to obtain similar scores, the research has shown that certain people will have certain scores that kind of spike on this, okay? And so all of those traits that I was describing, those are traits that are found in these code types. So it means that score number two was high, and score number 6 was high. And so if we have those two scores were both high, then that's a 2-6 code type. And these code types...
What code type was Ms. Hurd?
Ms. Hurd had, the clearest code type was 3-6, but then she also had some other code types that were less significant.
What characteristics are associated with a 3-6 code type?
So a 3-6 code type, a lot of that anger is expressed in this code type. There can be actually a lot of cruelty, usually with people who are less powerful. Actually, when you see this code type, you want to, if you can, to follow up with subordinates coworkers, people who may have observed their behavior more closely. The 3-6 code type is very concerned with their image, very attention-seeking, very prone to externalizing blame to a point where it's unclear whether they can even admit to themselves that they do have responsibility in certain areas. A lot of suppressed and denied anger, but the anger is very present, will explode out, and a lot of issues in their close relationships.
How does Ms. Hurd's code type fit in with your overall opinion as to personality disorders?
Well, this might be an appropriate time to describe a little bit about these personality disorders, because I think what you'll hear is that there's a lot of consistency there. So borderline personality disorder is a disorder of stability. It's instability, and it's instability in personal relationships, it's instability in their emotions, it's instability in their behavior, and it's instability in their sense of self and their identity. And that instability is really driven by this underlying terror of abandonment. So one of the key features also of this disorder, and all of it is like pistons of an engine kind of firing off and igniting one another. But when somebody is afraid of being abandoned by their partner or by anybody else in their environment and they have this disorder, they'll make desperate attempts to prevent that from happening. And those desperate attempts could be physical aggression, it could be threatening, it could be harming themselves. But these are behaviors that are usually very extreme and very concerning to the people around them. The anger is typically what, sadly, it's counteractive, right? So the thing these people fear most is being abandoned, but over time, the anger, the explosive anger that they show when somebody is needing space, or when somebody's really not doing anything wrong, because a lot of times they read into things that they perceive as being a slight to them or being somebody intending to harm them that actually isn't happening. They'll exaggerate it, and they'll explode. They'll react in this heightened manner that is just exhausting for their partners. Oftentimes their partners will try to make them happy at first and really allow themselves to be a punching bag, thinking that they can somehow solve this problem, that somehow they can make this better. And eventually it just overwhelms them. Histrionic personality disorder is very
Before
similar.
we move on to that,
Okay.
Are you familiar with the term emotional reactivity?
I am.
What is that?
So emotional reactivity is very common in the diagnosis. So essentially, like I said, there's instability in emotions. People with borderline personality disorder are often misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder because they can be up and down. They can look very depressed, and they can look very elated, but these changes are happening within a matter of hours. Somebody with bipolar disorder, this is a clinical depression lasting days, weeks, a clinical mania where sometimes they even need to be hospitalized because they're so grandiose. They clear out their bank account and go to Vegas and spend it all. They're acting in some very bizarre ways. With borderline personality disorder, you're having these fluctuating moods constantly. And again, this hypersensitivity to being slighted or feeling offended, really driven by the fear that if you're offended or slighted, if the therapist comes in 2 minutes late, or if somebody shows up to dinner 2 minutes late, that they might be abandoning you. And it's not as if the borderline is considering themselves abandoned in that moment, but they just know that they have this overwhelming emotion, and there are no attempts to control that emotion. There are no attempts to regulate it. So if they're in the middle of the restaurant and they feel offended, they're going to start the fight. People are going to see it, or they might just start crying or break down, but they'll make a lot of accusations, and that reactivity is when you're going to see a lot of this escalation in the bizarre behavior. They can react violently, they can react aggressively, they will often physically prevent their partner from trying to leave if their partner wants to get space from all of this intense emotion, and oftentimes they will be abusive to their partners in these situations. Sometimes they'll physically restrain them from leaving and become injured that way, but also people with borderline personality disorder, it seems to be a predictive factor for women who implement violence against their partner. And one of the most common tactics that they'll use is actually physically assaulting and then getting harmed themselves. But mostly, we call this administrative violence. So essentially, this is saying that they'll make threats using the legal system. So they might say that they are going to file a restraining order or claim abuse, or they might do these things to essentially try to keep their partner from leaving. In the moment, again, they're not consciously thinking, I'm going to keep my partner from leaving right now. They're just thinking, I can't stand this. I hate my partner. They went from idealizing to suddenly devaluing because of the hurt, and they'll do anything to express that big emotion of anger.
Your Honor, may we approach?
All right, yes, sir.
Okay. You indicated you were talking about emotional reactivity. What, if any, emotional reactivity did you observe in your review? And let's do this one at a time.
Okay. So there were a couple indications to me. First, I can sort of think about it with the treatment records. So particularly Dr. Cohen-Connell's, am I getting the name right? I feel like for some reason in my mind I might have just reversed it. But Dr. Cohen's records, I did reverse it. He actually refers to this reactivity quite a bit and to Ms. Heard's temper. And that temper, it's often branded, or being hot-headed, is really characteristic of borderline personality disorder. As is their very charming, personable nature. This is a disorder of contradictions. In Nurse Filati's notes, I thought there was something interesting. She references a night when they're out to dinner, I believe in London, and she provided positive reinforcement to Ms. Heard because Ms. Heard had been disappointed by a mistake made by the server, and it sort of references how previously she might have criticized the server or become upset by that, and that she didn't this time, and so that had been some sort of a step forward. And there was also an indication actually in Dr. Hughes's, Dr. Hughes is a psychologist who had been appointed by Ms. Heard to conduct as an evaluation as well. In Ms. Hughes's interview of Ms. Heard disclosed that she had cut her arm in the past, which is a typical reactive type thing somebody with this diagnosis can do. It's one of the symptoms. And that's sort of all I can think of top of my mind from the treatment records. Moving into some of the declarations or deposition testimony, what struck me was Ms. Raquel Pennington's testimony. She's a former friend of Ms. Heard's, and she told a story about, I suppose, they were shopping for Thanksgiving accoutrements, something to prepare for Thanksgiving, and Ms. Heard struck her in the face, sort of out of the blue, which is, I thought was interesting because that is one of those signs of borderline personality disorder where if if a friend or a loved one isn't meeting your needs in that moment, people with borderline personality disorder can be very caring in their relationships as long as their needs are being met. They feel that their needs should be met when they want them met at a specific level, and if they're not, then that anger, that sense of harm causes them to react. So the striking Ms. Pennington, per Ms. Pennington's report in the declaration or the testimony, I thought was pretty consistent. And then Ms. Hurd's own self-descriptions.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question about,
Sure.
You indicated Ms. Pennington was a former friend of,
Yes.
of Ms. Hurd. Is there a relationship between borderline personality disorder and intimate relationships?
Yes, so the instability definitely translates to their relationships. You'll see relationships start very intensely. People will, somebody with borderline personality disorder perceives the relationship as extremely close. This pattern of idealizing and devaluing is definitely at play. They do this with their lovers and also with their friends. And so this might be the perfect person, their perfect soulmate friend, perfect soulmate partner, and their engagement in the relationship is very alluring, very charming to the other person. And so initially everything seems great. But what occurs is that reality sets in. People are not perfect, even when we have a lot in common with them. Whereas most of us can accept somebody as a whole, somebody who has a little bit of flaws, and still think this is my great friend who always constantly running late for dinner. The person with borderline personality disorder, things are in these extremes, this black and white, we call it splitting. And so that person goes from being idealized, the perfect person, to dumpster. They are totally devalued. They are the worst friend. They don't care anything about me. I have better people around. And then there will be a repair because the person with this disorder does feel remorseful after they have these reactions, angry, tell their friend off. But over time, it wears away at these relationships. And so what you'll usually see is many, many transitions in their friendships over the years, people who have sort of fallen by the wayside, who were really very close-knit at one time, and then, but there's not a lot of consistency in the long term. You'll also see that with their intimate relationships, many, many relationships, but none that are particularly long-term.
How does borderline personality disorder relate to identity issues?
So again, that instability also travels toward identity. And when I was describing personality earlier, I was talking a little bit about those traits we have that help us know who we are. When you have borderline personality disorder, that actually is not something you understand. So people with this disorder actually take on the identity of the people they're spending time with because it's comforting. It's very uncomfortable to not know who you are. Some people with this disorder will describe a feeling of emptiness when they feel like they've been abandoned because now they don't know who they are in the world. And so when somebody with this disorder is going through that initial enmeshment phase with new people and they're idealizing them, they often will take on the identities of those people. So they may mimic them in a lot of ways. They might mimic the way they dress, their interests, the way they talk. And for this reason, the people around somebody with this disorder kind of from the outside may feel like, wait, I thought you were this way, now you're advocating for this, and this is your new main interest in life, or the thing you're throwing yourself into all completely. Music tastes might change, hobbies will change, the way they dress.
Okay. In addition to borderline personality disorder, I understand that you diagnosed another personality disorder. What's that?
So histrionic personality disorder, and these are really two sides of the same coin. They belong to the same cluster. We call these clusters. It's a way to organize personality disorders in that DSM. And this cluster is described as the personality disorders that are dramatic, erratic, and emotional. Okay, so unpredictable, but really having to do with emotions and relationships. They're very similar. Whereas I was saying that borderline personality disorder, a lot of the key features that you're going to notice are instability. When it comes to histrionic, a lot of the key features are going to be drama and shallowness. Similarly, with borderline personality disorder, there's this underlying drive of avoiding abandonment. With histrionic personality disorder, that underlying drive is to always be the center of attention. Because if you don't have that attention on you, it feels similarly to borderline personality disorder. You feel pretty empty, like you don't have that sense of being or of value, okay? So whereas borderline personality disorder might have more of the visible reactivity if somebody seems to be leaving, with histrionic personality disorder, what you're going to see is extreme discomfort with not being the center of attention, extreme efforts to be the center of attention, and when they feel that they're not the center of attention, you will see some strange things, making up stories to try to get attention, often taking on a victim or princess role. Those two roles in particular are pretty consistent. Seeking caretaking. Borderline personality disorder is similar because with borderline personality disorder, these shifts of identity and the splitting, you might see somebody go from being, in the DSM it describes it as a needy supplicant of help, seeking the perfect caretaker, to suddenly being the avenger against injustice or thinking that their partner is a terrible person. With histrionic, what you'll see is somebody who wants to be the center of attention, has sort of that impressionistic speech, very flowery, very enthusiastic, but nothing's really being said. The moment your attention wears away because they're so demanding for attention, that's when they might take the victim role or the princess role and even make up stories. Sometimes those stories are to bolster the victim role. Sometimes those stories are just to make them look more interesting or accomplished in their mind so that they can get respect and attention that way.
Is there a relation between histrionic personality disorder and attractiveness?
There is, strangely, and this is always one of the trickiest things to talk about because how is that a symptom? But characteristically, people with this disorder are very, very interested in looks, but more importantly, they utilize their looks to get that attention, to get that respect that they're seeking. And so this type of a personality might be flirtatious with everybody. Characteristically, they actually couldn't even be subtly, and when I say flirtatious, I'm not talking overtly sexy, but kind of inappropriately flattering. Sometimes they act in a kind of a girlish way to be cute and to engender attention. And this will even occur in their therapy relationships as a way to sort of avoid getting negative feedback or criticism. Oftentimes they'll bring the therapist gifts or be distracting if they engage in therapy because they just don't want any criticism. They want the therapist to like them.
Does the intelligence of the affected person bear on the manner in which these disorders present?
Excuse me, I choked a little bit water. Yes, and I think one way to think about it that's probably a little more accurate than just intelligence is, in psychology, we would describe this more as sophistication. So street smart, so to speak. The way, for instance, I've had many clients who have borderline personality disorder who are messy and really clearly suffering, and they might be difficult and all over the place and yell at you in the middle of a session, but it's so, it's not tailored. It's so much easier to work with because of that just openness and rawness of it, genuineness. Sometimes you'll have a more sophisticated presentation. There are 9 symptoms and only 5 have to be met. So there are a lot of different combinations and different ways it can present. And sometimes you'll have more of a petulant version of this where it really shows when you push the button and you're kind of, whoa, what was that? So somebody who's really productive, high functioning, successful, and you get to know them and you think they're fantastic because they're so interested in you too. And you might not realize it, but they're mimicking you perfectly. So you're really just kind of falling in love with this new friend who is being you. But then all of a sudden, you say something that they think is offensive, and you can't, even in your wildest thoughts, understand how that could have offended somebody, but their reaction is so strong that you kind of buy into it. Gosh, maybe I did say something offensive, and you feel bad about it. So that sophisticated version, they can be a little bit more calculated in the way they present. They tend to kind of hit you where it hurts a little bit more, and they can be actually very, very destructive.
What conclusions were you able to draw about Ms. Heard's sophistication from her testing?
Well, from her testing and from her presentation, she was very likable, but her testing in particular showed that she approached it in a manner that, remember I told you about those scales that are pretty neat. She approached it in a manner that very clearly minimized any psychological dysfunction, not just that, but really presented herself as free of any problems. And she did so in a way that was very, very sophisticated, not obvious, by responding to questions that most people might not notice were trying to detect that.
How did you determine that?
So that's based on a particular scale on the MMPI-2 that is designed specifically to detect a type of responding that's a little bit more clever, a little bit more sophisticated, minimizing problems in a way that most lay people probably wouldn't understand, and even providers, very difficult to detect.
You mentioned that one of the characteristics of borderline personality disorder is emotional reactivity. How might that present in an intimate relationship?
So I think it probably presents mostly, or you'd see the bulk of it in intimate relationships because of that regular interaction and the desire for your partner to meet all of your needs, to be the perfect caretaker. Also that the hallmark of the disorder with the splitting, so idealizing, devaluing, and the perceiving of all sorts of neutral events as somehow demeaning or disrespectful. It's regular escalations of anger, frustrated complaints, criticisms of your partner. But because the person with borderline personality disorder, first of all, they're more sensitive to things, they feel distress more strongly, and then that distress lasts longer. So these types of blow-ups go on forever, and they're very cyclic. It feels like you just can't get a resolution, and eventually the partner will try to leave, will want to leave to take a break. It wears them down, and that's when the borderline might explode and act very aggressively or violently to try to prevent them from leaving.
In addition to diagnosing Ms. Heard with these two personality disorders, did you form another opinion about Ms. Heard's mental status?
Yes. So, go ahead.
If the answer to that is yes, I'm going to now ask you,
okay,
what
yes,
was that?
I did.
Okay, what is it?
So, in addition to looking for Ms. Heard's general mental status, any psychological issues that were present, I very specifically was assessing to determine whether post-traumatic stress disorder was present, and it was not.
How do you know that?
So first of all, from multiple information sources, right? So I was integrating the interview, my review of the data, the case records, other people's testimony, her treatment records. And then I also conducted, in addition to the MMPI-2 and looking at that data, I also conducted the clinician-administered PTSD scale, the CAPS-5, which is the gold standard PTSD assessment developed by the National Center for PTSD, shown to be valid, accurate for use not just with service members, but also with civilians, men, women, all genders, and also all ethnicities, and then also specifically for use in a courtroom setting.
How do you conduct the CAPS 5?
So the CAPS 5 is a standard interview. What that means is that it's an interview with very clear questions that are scripted, and you ask those same questions every time you test a person. So because you're doing that, you're actually taking something that would typically be kind of subjective, an interview with somebody, and you're making it more objective. When you ask those same questions in the same way every time somebody's assessed with this, now you can apply a scoring protocol and actually score their responses.
Okay. As a result of applying those protocols, what did you conclude?
Ms. Heard did not have PTSD, and there were also pretty significant indications that she was grossly exaggerating symptoms of PTSD when asked about them.
How did you make that latter conclusion?
So one of the strengths of this test, as I mentioned, the important thing about any test used when you're doing an evaluation in forensics is to make sure that the person is responding accurately. And this test does that by not just asking people whether they have a symptom, but asking follow-up questions that draw out very detailed accounts of every single symptom of PTSD. And when you're really familiar with this disorder, which you need to be to administer this test, there are nuances in the way a person will describe their symptoms that have been shown repeatedly to indicate exaggeration or faking. There are also indications when somebody is clearly giving you a genuine response.
Okay. What, if any, symptoms of PTSD did you observe in Ms. Heard?
So there are 20 kind of core symptoms that somebody can manifest with PTSD. You don't have to have all of them. Ms. Heard initially said that she had, in the first question, you say, do you ever have this, before you get to the more nuanced follow-up questions. When I asked that first question on each item, she initially said, yes, I have that, to 19 of the 20 symptoms. That's not typical even of somebody with the most disabling form of PTSD. When we eventually sort of dialed it down, she had 3 remaining symptoms. And having symptoms of any disorder is common for all of us. Some of us struggle with sleep. Some of us get anxious. It could be several different disorders. It could just be that you have this struggle in your life. But she had 3 specific symptoms that I scored as present. Off the top of my head, I might miss one, but one was sleep disturbance. So she reported that she has frequent nightmares. Another one was that she said that she tends to have a startle response. So if she gets startled or surprised, she tends to stay in sort of a hyper startle mode for quite a while. And that's consistent with a couple of things. It can be consistent with PTSD if other criteria are met. It's also consistent with childhood complex trauma, which is something that can occur when your brain is forming. If you constantly feel unsafe, if your parents are abusive, or if they're not present, if you're neglected, you can develop certain physiological responses that can stay for a long time in your life. So I noted that seemed like a very genuine, accurate account where she stays in this state of kind of hyper arousal, has a hard time calming down if she gets surprised.
You mentioned nightmares as well.
Yes.
Did she recount for you the nature of the nightmares?
So they were vague. She indicated that she has recurrent nightmares and that she feels as though she's being held down. And there was some conflict in that account because even though that could be a PTSD symptom, it is fairly vague, but I still scored it as present. And in her initial treatment with Dr. Bonnie Jacobs, which I believe started before she began dating Mr. Depp, she had indicated to Dr. Jacobs, according to Dr. Jacobs's notes, that she was having repetitive nightmares back then and that they were related to her childhood trauma. And so that came up several times in the notes. Dr. Jacobs kept mentioning that.
Thank you. What is feigning
Feigning is essentially faking or exaggerating symptoms that aren't present.
Does the CAPS-5 control for that?
It doesn't necessarily control for it, it can expose it by drawing out
How does that work?
because you're not just simply handing the person a checklist that says, here are all the symptoms of PTSD, why don't just check off the ones you have, which clearly if you're trying to look like you have PTSD, you would just check them all. The CAPS-5, because it requires them to describe in detail how they experience the symptom, where it shows up, what it looks like, what sort of examples they can give you, how many times it's happened in the last couple weeks, how many times it's happened in the last month. By the end of each symptom, you've gotten a very good picture of a couple things. One, does it meet the definition of the symptom? Are they getting it right? Is this actually the symptom, or are they kind of confusing this with something else? Number two, are they giving you very vague accounts? Are they giving you kind of a stereotyped idea of what the symptom is based on media or movies or something that actually is completely different from genuine experiences of this symptom? Or are they giving you a very genuine, heartfelt, sometimes minimizing, but it's ticking all the boxes. Their mannerisms while they're describing it, the actual very specific, very nuanced, symbolic ways they're describing it. A lot of times it smells, it sounds, that all appears in genuine accounts, and it's something that people really get wrong when they're feigning.
In addition to your conclusion that Ms. Heard does not have PTSD, did you make a conclusion with respect to her symptoms?
Yes, actually I did. So, just because somebody doesn't have PTSD doesn't mean that they weren't harmed psychologically by whatever is being alleged. In this case, Ms. Heard is alleging that she was psychologically harmed and that she suffered PTSD because of abuse that she alleges occurred by Mr. Depp. So the MMPI too is helpful because it shows you kind of everything, any other symptoms. And then in Ms. Heard's own self-report and her prior treatment records, I knew that she had reported to me that she had had some other symptoms. So now what becomes really important is determining, and let me clarify one thing here, not so much a diagnosis, but did she start to experience symptoms during the relationship and after? Did they worsen after? Or could these types of symptoms or reports be explained by other factors? A, by feigning, B, by pre-existing conditions, or C, by other stressful life events that might have occurred. So the main symptoms that I was looking at didn't meet criteria for PTSD, right? There was also substantial evidence of this sort of emotional dysregulation, emotional disorganization, the shallowness, the dramatic affect. Now, when you have a lot of childhood trauma, you can actually have some similar type presentation in adulthood. There are some differences though, but also that's not something that would have occurred after this relationship. So now I was looking at, are there indications that these types of things that she's described, this transient anxiety, the issues with sleep, were these there prior? And sure enough, Ms. Heard, in her own self-report, stated to me that when she first got to LA, she was seeking treatment for, in her words, blanket anxiety and depression. She also reported that she was taking medications. In general, none of them were helpful. That's actually very typical of borderline personality disorder. Medications typically aren't very helpful for somebody with the disorder. They really need an intensive, lifelong type of therapy, which is not necessarily as relevant to this. But interestingly also, people with borderline personality disorder often respond really positively to stimulant medications that are given for ADD or ADHD. And in one of Nurse Filati's notes, she reported that Ms. Heard told her that none of the medications were working for her except for one Provigil, which is often prescribed as stimulant medication. And I just thought that was interesting and sort of consistent with more of these lifelong personality disorders that aren't necessarily caused by a harm by any allegations but have been there and will remain there typically. The other issue, so the anxiety, she had already indicated that had been there prior, but the form of the anxiety. So looking at Dr. Hughes's testing and then also looking at the scores on the MMPI, when you look at all these little combinations of the scores, you can actually learn a lot about, is the anxiety related to an event, or is this more a person who tends to be an anxious person regardless of what's going on in their life? And somebody might describe them as a worrywart. And the scores, the little combination of scores that she obtained actually indicated that it was the latter, that her anxiety tends to be separate from events and more just kind of a constant, and it comes and goes, but it's more of a trait.
I have no further questions for this witness.
All right. Maybe why don't we go ahead and, Ms. Brady, go ahead and have our lunch break. It might be a good idea to break it up there. Okay, I know. I can see you jumping up. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take our lunch recess. Just again, do not do any outside research. Don't discuss the case with anybody, okay? We'll have you back here. And again, Dr. Curry, since you're in the middle of your testimony, please do not discuss your testimony with anybody at this time, okay? All right, let's just, when we come back at 1:50, okay? Come back at 1:50? All right, thank you.
Okay, everyone, they are now getting ready to take their lunch break. They will return at 1:50. And what I will do is we will start another stream. We will put the link to the new stream to the new video in the description below. Please make sure you come at 1:50 and join us. Get you some lunch, get you a cup of coffee, some tea, and we'll be back. And so thank you again for joining us. We will be back at 1:50 in a brand new stream. So make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, but make sure you subscribe so it'll come up in your notifications when we return at 1:50. All right, everybody. Thanks again. We'll see you in a few minutes. Enjoy your lunch. Bye.